Hello and welcome to the first episode of my new show, Demystified. So what is this show? Philosophy is a huge passion of mine, and it seems that the subject has become lost somewhat. Whereas in the ancient world philosophy was seen as a key step in education, it has now become some mysterious art studied in dusty lecture halls. But this is absolutely not the case. In each episode, I will aim to introduce an area of study or individual philosopher. These videos should not be seen as comprehensive guides to the topics they explore. There is far too much information for that, but I hope that listening to me talk will encourage you to go and find out more, not only about what I talk about, but also about how the world around us really works. So, without further ado, let's begin with the world of ancient Greece and the father of Western philosophy. It can be hard to believe that one man living 2,500 years ago would have much in common with us today. However, the study of early philosophy has shown us that the groundwork for all modern thought was laid down in the ancient world. While it may be hard for us to agree with his beliefs, Socrates is by far one of the most important thinkers for forming Western philosophy and the society we live in. He was a man who pushed boundaries and revolutionised thought in ancient Europe. The year is 469 BC, and the city-state of Athens is going through a period of prosperity under the rule of a man named Pericles. The state of Athens is well known for its politics. They were a very keen democracy, and it was expected of every citizen to actively take part in the legal process. Athenians loved nothing more than to engage in debate and dialogue, whereas today court cases and politics are based on facts and figures to help persuade people. In the Athenian system, it was more important to be a good orator. This time period came before the rise of complex language and reason, which made people who could command language far more impressive. At around this time, a boy named Socrates is born. Little did anyone know that this would be one of the most influential and eccentric thinkers that ancient Greece would see, and that he would eventually be executed by the state of Athens for transgressions against it. The life and work of Socrates provides an interesting challenge for philosophers and classicists alike, as, unlike most academics, Socrates never wrote anything down. All that we know of him has had to come from third-person accounts, most famously those of Plato, Aristophanes, and Xenophon. In fact, there is only one example of texts that reference him that were actually written during his lifetime, and this simply came in the form of sentences and fragments in an Athenian comedy. This issue is big enough to be given its own name. It is simply called the Socratic problem. The issue is not only finding the information about him, but also deciding how accurate it is. Plato tended to use Socrates as the main character in his work. Now, Plato's work takes the form of dialogues, where multiple fictional and non-fictional characters discuss philosophical issues. So it is tough to find the point where the views of Socrates stop and are replaced by Plato's own beliefs being told through the mouthpiece of Socrates. The views of Socrates from Plato and Xenophon often differ. Xenophon was a less well-educated military man and was keen to defend Socrates against all attack. For example, he rejected the claim that Socrates was impious, which here means to reject the Athenian god system. Bertrand Russel comments on Xenophon's view of Socrates and describes it as being dull and commonplace, as Xenophon misses out Socrates' hostility to many things and his passion within debate. Now, Aristophanes as the third source is by no means as reliable as the others for historical accuracy. He was a playwright who wrote Socrates as a comedic character in his much-loved play Clouds. He does not present the true man, but instead some over-exaggerated caricature of him who is constantly espousing about irrelevant things in a way akin to a madman. He was designed to become a laughingstock within the piece. It is possible that this well-known play would shape people's views of Socrates. There would be no reason for people to go and fact-check the play, much in the way that we may hear something on the news nowadays which may possibly be biased, but there's no reason for us to go and fact-check it. So perhaps the view of Socrates among Athens was swayed by the work of Aristophanes. Despite this, it has been agreed that Socrates was an ugly man. In the modern period, we see images of him in statues which show him to be well-proportioned and wise. However, accounts from the time agree to tell us the opposite. Apparently he had protruding eyes which were splayed wide across his face, as well as a flat, upturned nose, similar to that of a pig. He kept his hair unkempt and his body unwashed. He failed to wear fresh clothes or even shoes. However, despite this, he was still fit and fought for Athens. We can see more realistic images of Socrates in the drawings by Erni. It has also been argued that Socrates was a very resilient man. It seemed that he had total control over his body, the perfect example of mind over matter. Soldiers that fought with him claimed that even when fighting in winter weather, Arctic conditions, he would wear minimal clothing and still go barefoot, and he could even perform better on marches than his fellow soldiers who were wearing warm clothes. Furthermore, it was claimed that he was seemingly impervious to the effects of alcohol. While he rarely drank, it is claimed that when he did, he could outdrink any of his companions with ease. We do know some other historical details about him. For example, we know he lived in Athens for the entirety of his life, with the exception of the time he spent fighting for the Athenian army. However, we are unsure how he made his money, or even if he did make any money. There is a possibility that he was a stonemason for a time to follow in the footsteps of his father, but others believe he probably survived off his friends. It is also believed that he was married to a woman named Xanthippe. However, it does not seem to have been a great marriage. It is believed that she had an ill temper and was 30 years younger than him. However, it would not be unsurprising if her temper was caused by Socrates' decision to live in poverty. Socrates rejected much of the Athenian lifestyle. Whereas most people spent their time volunteering and taking part in community affairs, Socrates was keen to do his own thing. He never aimed to earn himself a living, nor engage in formal higher education. Despite this, he did understand the value of society, and did not reject it entirely. He certainly did not aim to propagate an anarchic system. We can see this through his military career. He understood the value of giving back to the society that he lives in. He chose to keep himself poor, but he was certainly a figure within the community. He often had the Athenian youths around him, listening to his words and learning from him. However, he vehemently rejected the claim that he was a teacher. He encouraged knowledge to come in a new way, rather than to teach in the normal way, and this leads to one of his most important contributions to philosophy and society as a whole, the Socratic dialogue. During our lifetime, we spend many years in classrooms, being taught things, possibly from a teacher, or maybe just reading from a textbook. But Socrates thought learning should come in a different form. It was his belief that everyone should be able to arrive at knowledge through their own thought and reason, not just because someone had told them that something was true. He believed that all knowledge was a priori, which is a philosophical term meaning to come from thought and reason. This belief was coupled with another of his key beliefs, that being that the purpose of philosophy is to care for the soul, and these two things came together to form the Socratic dialogue. The idea behind the Socratic dialogue is two or more people discussing a subject to expose hidden biases and remove falsifiable claims from their knowledge until they can achieve what Socrates would call true knowledge. For him, this was any knowledge that was eternal and unchanging. Generally, a Socratic dialogue would start with one simple question, perhaps, what is beauty, or is it right to worship the gods? A famous example of this would be the debate in Plato's Republic, where the question being evaluated is it better to be moral than immoral? Following this initial questions, both sides in the debate would listen to the other's points and work together to find claims that could not be proven wrong, and thus remove all imperfect knowledge from an argument to eventually find an answer to the question. This method of learning could be very confrontational for those who were set in their ways, as Socrates would often expose the errors in their beliefs and would keep poking and prodding at every little aspect of their argument until it was entirely broken and the person would leave out of frustration. They would get angry that Socrates made them look like an idiot, or that he just wouldn't leave them alone. Oftentimes, Socrates would pretend that he had no knowledge on the subject he was discussing when asking his opening questions, so he might go up to a politician in the street and say, "What is beauty?" And then the politician would give back some answer which had many flaws in it, and Socrates would reveal his hand and say that he knew a lot more than he was letting on. This feigning of ignorance has become known as Socratic irony, and it only added to the annoyance felt by those he debated with. The Socratic dialogue is one of the reasons that Socrates is seen as the father of Western philosophy. It is known as a dialectic method of inquiry, and is the foundation upon which a vast amount of Western philosophy is based. This is arguably his most important addition to the world of philosophy. However, he did also have many other important things to say on various subjects. For example, he has been credited with the quote, "I know that I know nothing." This can be found in another of Plato's works, Apology. Now this can mean many things. Personally, I see it as Socrates acknowledging that there is so much to possibly know, and no way of knowing how much one knows at all, which is quite a complex thing, so I'll say it again. Socrates is acknowledging that there is so much to possibly know, and no way of knowing how much one knows at all. Other groups may say that we can never truly know anything at all, and it is possible Socrates believes this. There can be evidence for both sides of the argument. For example, he once claimed there to be a difference between human ignorance and perfect knowledge. As he also claimed that knowledge came through being virtuous, anyone that does wrong will be limited by their ignorance. However, in Plato's Republic, the allegory of the cave seems to provide a route to enlightenment through philosophy. Although he did neither see himself as wise nor having knowledge, Socrates did believe that his intellectual strength came from his ability to bring knowledge about in others by using the Socratic dialogue. He paralleled himself to a midwife. Now, a midwife can help bring a mother's child into the world, whereas Socrates can deliver knowledge to those who are willing to seek it. One interesting belief that he had, which is also based around knowledge, or the lack thereof, is his belief that no one chooses to do wrong. The only times that we act immorally are those in which we are ignorant. This belief, if found to be true, would be highly significant. It could throw doubt on the Christian belief that sinning cannot allow one to reach heaven, if it is also the case that humans can never achieve perfect knowledge. It is a well-held belief that God is all-knowing and that humans are not. Therefore, humans are ignorant in some ways. If it is the case that it is not our fault that we sin, but merely due to the fact we are ignorant, then is it right to blame us for sin if it is merely part of our nature? He also believed that there is an eternal, immortal soul. This is one example of a belief that can still be found in the modern day. We can see it paralleled in Eastern traditions, such as the Buddhist belief in reincarnation, which necessitates an eternal soul or other essence which makes us distinctly human. It has been argued that this is perhaps a coping mechanism for Socrates, as it is very hard to accept that life simply ceases at the end of the physical world. This view was not widely held in Athens at the time. People were relatively non-committal on the issue. In the final book of Plato's Republic, Socrates asserts it to be the truth. However, in the Apology, he does not seem sure of himself. All in all, his arguments do not have the same persuasive power as many of his other points, and so there's been no real conclusion drawn from his arguments for the immortality of the soul. The end of Socrates' life is by no means a happy one. Throughout his philosophical career, Socrates had made many enemies for himself. He had been a critic of the Athenian system of government, as it seemed he was opposed to the idea of democracy. He had, on several occasions, shown support both overtly and covertly for some Spartan traditions and even of their worldview. Sparta was Athens' greatest rival, and so this was not taken at all well by the ruling classes. Towards the end of his life, coming towards his execution, the tensions were higher than they had ever been before. Around 5 years before his trial, Athens had lost to Sparta in the Peloponnesian War, and they had lost their democratic government as it had been replaced by an oligarchy. The name given to the new leaders was the 30 Tyrants. Now, if you're going to call your leaders tyrants, they're clearly not well liked, so it is no surprise that 1 year later they were replaced again by a democracy. It is at this time, only 2 years later, that Socrates was brought to trial. Now, it's hardly surprised that he was tried at this time, because the government was still weak, and they needed to make a scapegoat to show that anyone who criticises the Athenian way of life will not be able to stand. They felt vulnerable, and he was a risk to them. However, it was not just the politics of Athens that Socrates attacked. It was the people as well, albeit inadvertently. An oracle at Delphi once claimed that Socrates was the wisest man alive, much to his annoyance. As mentioned before, Socrates did not think that he knew anything. So he tried to disprove this claim in the only way he knew how to, through the use of the Socratic dialogue. He spent time talking to the wisest and the noblest of the city, in order to see if he could disprove the oracle's claim. However, as he spent time talking to these people, he realised that they knew far less than anyone realised, as he slowly broke down their beliefs and assertions. First, he went to a politician who was well known and well respected. However, he deemed him to not be as wise as people thought. Then, he asked poets to explain their poems, but found they could not. Finally, he went to the other artisans, but was again underwhelmed by their lack of wisdom. He was eventually left with the paradox that he was the wisest person, as he knew that he was ignorant, and this has been known as the Socratic paradox. The nobles he spoke to felt like they had become a mockery and were unsurprisingly vexed. At trial, Socrates was found guilty of impiety and corrupting the minds of the youths of Athens. For this, he was sentenced to death by consumption of poison. Socrates accepted his fate, and although he could have fought against it in the court, he chose not to. He provided weak arguments, and he didn't appeal to the sympathy by producing his family, which was common to do at the time in Athens. Both Plato and Xenophon agree that Socrates had the opportunity to escape from prison by the means of his friends bribing the guards. However, he rejected this for 4 main reasons. 1. If he escaped, then his friends would become responsible for a crime, and he had no desire for them to suffer for his apparent misdeeds. 2. If he ran away, it would appear that he had some fear of death. However, he said that this was not the case, therefore he would face it bravely. 3. His teachings would not be received better in any other city, state, or polis, so why bother leaving Athens? And 4. He believed he had entered into a social contract. By living in Athens, he had subjected himself to their legal system, and to break from this would undermine and harm the state, which is unvirtuous, and therefore should be avoided at all costs. The entire story of his trial and execution can be found in Plato's Apology. So that was the end for poor Socrates, but it is admirable that he stayed true to his values to the very end of his life in 399 BC, aged 70. But the question is, to what extent did he influence the world of philosophy after himself? Arguably, the most important impact was that he was the tutor of Plato, who is regarded by many as the greatest philosopher of all time. He is also responsible for shaping the final member of the main triad of ancient Greek thinkers. This, of course, is Aristotle. Later on, many different groups of people sought to use Socrates. Many saw him as laying the groundwork of their own thoughts. This ranges from the Cynics and the Skeptics to the Christians and the Neoplatonists. Medieval Islam also saw Socrates' name mentioned, as he stood against the religious conventions of Athens and rejected their polytheistic system. The medieval Muslims saw this as support for a monotheistic society, but this is not necessarily his actual beliefs. Later, during the Enlightenment, his importance to the development of human thought and rationalism was recognised. Many people praise his martyrdom. Intellectual integrity is highly important to all those who wish to propagate a new philosophical system, and Socrates was the first to really achieve this by dying for what he thought was true. Well, there you go. Thank you very much for listening to the first episode of my show, Demystified. Hopefully, you've enjoyed yourself and you've learnt something new. I'll leave links to further reading and sources that I use in the description below. Feel free to leave a comment to say what I can improve on or what you really enjoyed, or perhaps just something that you found interesting. Hopefully you'll listen to some other episodes. I aim to go through Plato and Aristotle next to complete the main 3 ancient Greek philosophers. Hopefully I'll see you there. Thanks for listening. Have a good day.